Hello, America. Hello, friends. Welcome to Your Leo Nation, where we believe in the rule of law, a civil society, and self responsibility. We are so happy to have a great guest tonight with us, Bill Bodner. Bill is the special agent in charge of the Drug Enforcement Administration, my bad, DEA, Los Angeles Field Division. Bill, welcome aboard. So grateful to have you here tonight.
Thanks, Mark. Happy to be here. It's great to talk to you.
It really is a pleasure. I know you and I briefly crossed paths when I was chief of the California Highway Patrol in LA County, um, but you have moved up. You've moved up through the ranks rather quickly through your just about 30 years now, right?
Yeah, 31 years actually this month.
31 years. And I know you have spent a great deal of that time in Los Angeles, in this Los Angeles Field Division. Doesn't cover just Los Angeles. That's where you're actually headquartered. We can talk about that. But tell us a little bit about your career
Sure.
and how you got to where you are now.
Sure. So, I like to tell people that when I first applied to DEA, it was 1989, and I was rejected right away, Mark. I was a guy out of college, no law enforcement experience, no military experience. Um, but I knew that this was the career that I wanted. So I had a good recruiter, someone who wasn't just kind of filling out paperwork, but spent some time with me and said, "Hey, here's the direction you ought to go." And I actually went back. I had my college degree, went back to graduate school, applied again a couple of years later, and got hired, luckily. And for me, I just knew that this was going to be my career for the next 30 plus years, as it has been. I was assigned to work, grew up in the East Coast, New Jersey, Massachusetts, immediately out of the academy, transferred to the furthest office there was from that part of the country, in Los Angeles. And I've been here in Los Angeles, with the exception of a couple year stint in Washington, D.C. I've been here for most of that 30 years.
Well, you know what? This is fascinating. I actually didn't know that about your path. You said you were rejected one time, and short stories, you didn't quit, you came back. What was it about the DEA that had you in that path to, here or nowhere else?
Yeah, that's a great question. So here's what it was. I remember, finishing up college and interviewing for jobs, and the thought of when it came down to the reality of what I was going to commit myself to, and make my living doing every single day, it was not going to be something that was a 9 to 5 behind a desk. Ironically, that's kind of where I am now, right? But when I
Yeah.
was 25 years old, it was not going to be something where I was 9 to 5 behind a desk. I needed something more than that, and then also it wasn't going to be something that was in not that there's anything wrong with this, but I didn't want something motivated by the almighty dollar. I wanted to do something where there was some kind of purpose or higher value to society or to the community. And at that time, drugs were a huge issue. It looked like an exciting career, and I was just all about it then.
Well, it looked like an exciting career because I'm sure that it was then, still now, like you said, you're the boss out here in one of the busiest parts of the administration here in Southern California. But I'm sure the time that you came on and working in Los Angeles, I mean, at that time, I mean, Bill, we were like in the height of the crack cocaine epidemic here in Los Angeles, not too far, actually, really where I grew up. I mean, I really am curious. I mean, what was that like for a new agent being really dumped in right the teeth of the machine?
Oh yeah, it was a lot to handle because, like I said, I didn't come from a law enforcement or military profession. I made it through the academy, had good training, but still, I was pretty green and assigned to work on a task force with LA County sheriff's deputies who had probably 15 years on the job, or LAPD detectives who had the same amount of time on the job. And here I am, this kind of college kid, basically, the reality of what I was back then. And it was the height of the crack cocaine time epidemic in LA. A lot of gang violence, crack cocaine everywhere, PCP, a huge issue back then. That was really what the focus was back then. It was all about cocaine and crack cocaine. And it was quite an adjustment for me to kind of to kind of, prove myself in that world coming in with no experience.
Yeah, I bet, to say the least. I'm sure it was a shock. I mean, I was a brand new officer, probably, well, not the tail end of that, but as things are kind of slowing down, I guess. People like you and other task forces were getting a handle, I think, in the early 1990s. I mean, I started down here in 1991 in patrol, and I was involved with some of that in a very ancillary role, assisting DEA, other federal agents on whisper stops and
Yep.
wall stops and
Yep.
things like this, trying to get to the big dogs. And watching a lot of these people, we take them down, book them, FIM, book them, and then let them right back out. Not to give away too many secrets about how cops would do
Right.
stuff,
Right.
but it was fascinating. It was a learning curve for me. What You said you worked with, I guess, on some task forces, or just
Yep.
more loosely coordinating
No,
with agencies?
a formal task force, which is still in existence here in LA, called the Southern
Mhm.
California Drug Task Force, part of what's called a HIDA initiative, High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Initiative. And that's kind of like a special funding source run out of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, separate from DEA. They fund the state and local task forces to just kind of build a synergy between federal and local law enforcement in the community. The premise being that, and I agree with this premise 100%, that most often local, county, and state officers know the community the best, know what the problems are, know who the problems are. And then as federal agents, we can come in with additional resources, maybe some very specific expertise, maybe like wiretaps, for example, and
Mhm.
kind of put those two sides together and really have a greater impact in doing good for the community.
Yeah. Well, I said the time that I spent working with the DEA, again, in an ancillary capacity, and never formally in a task force, worked with a lot of your guys and gals, and just been I tell you right now, just fantastic people who have specific great knowledge. Obviously, it kind of goes without saying, but for me, a cop for 30 years, I was always amazed at the level of professionalism and the information that you and your colleagues actually possess, and the ability to actually utilize that information. People, including myself, just probably very difficult to appreciate just how impactful that you guys are to keeping us as safe as we are in this country, from drug use. Obviously, a lot more to do, a long way to go,
Yep.
and brand new challenges that I certainly want to touch
Yep.
on. Um, Kind of fast forward from the crack cocaine epidemic, PCP,
Yep.
heroin, um, and now the drug is
Fentanyl. The drug is fentanyl. I mean,
fentanyl.
yeah, it's all about the
Yeah.
synthetic drugs right now, Mark. And we've seen that
Hmm.
shift probably starting. I think we did a good job in this country. There used to be a lot of methamphetamine labs here in Southern California where the methamphetamine was actually manufactured here. And then around 2004, 2005, some federal legislation was passed to make it more difficult to get the chemicals to make meth in this country. And the benefit to us here locally was those labs that are horrible for the environment went away, right? The negative part of that was it pushed the production south into Mexico, where they made the connections. Mexican drug cartels made the connections with China to get the chemicals to make meth, and started super labs, what we call them, basically mass producing the synthetic drugs. And one thing, and we're seeing that same kind of technique now with fentanyl. And one thing I explain to people when they say, like, why methamphetamine and why fentanyl. um, if you're a drug cartel and you want to maximize your profits, and you're dealing in cocaine, cocaine, the coca plant's not something that's grown in Mexico. So you have to source the drug from South America. You have to somehow get it smuggled through the transit zone in Central America, a bunch of different countries, get it into Mexico, and then you're smuggling it into the United States. And you're tacking on literally either a few hundred or maybe a few $1,000s a kilo to make money. So it's difficult to scale that and really scale that up and make huge amounts of money. So that's why the synthetic stimulant methamphetamine has really replaced cocaine, at least here on the West Coast, as the number one stimulant drug. Sure, there's still cocaine available, but there's literally tons more methamphetamine than cocaine now available on our streets. The same is true for opiate drugs. It used to be heroin. I mean, that was one of the staple drugs of the drug cartels going back to the 70s. In order to grow poppies in Mexico, it does grow there, but you need a very specific climate in a very specific area. So if you're a drug cartel, you have to control that territory. And that's one reason why there was a lot of violence in Mexico. It was fighting over this territory where it was uh, conducive, I guess, to grow poppy plants. And then you have to have people working in the fields. They're scoring the plants, they're scraping the gum. It's very, very labor intensive. And again, that's hard to scale. And there's only one growing season. So it's hard to scale and make money with heroin. Again, you turn to synthetic drugs where if you have the connections to get chemicals to make the drugs, which they do because they made those connections with methamphetamine, and it's the same group supplying the chemicals now to make fentanyl. There's really no limit to the amount of drugs you can create. It's just a lab in a warehouse, a lab in a garage. You can move it with a tractor trailer to another part of the country if you have to. And that's why we're seeing this huge explosion in synthetic drugs, is because it's so profitable for the drug cartels.
Well, it makes sense, and I listened to you, and obviously I want you to continue because there's so much information about fentanyl. We'll hear about it. It's ubiquitous. It's every place in the news, the media, social media, and warning about the dangers. But um, when I listened to you a few weeks ago at a function where you actually shared this, I felt so
Hmm.
educated. I actually felt ignorant, afterwards. Like, oh my God, I thought I kind of knew about fentanyl, and I don't. One of the things you talked about was the quote unquote
Hmm.
counterfeit
Right.
medication. And can you touch on
Yeah.
that about the misconception about the
And that's so
counterfeit
important
thing?
because, Mark, that's what's affecting our teenagers. It's almost to the point
Hmm.
where when I hear about a victim who died of a fentanyl overdose or poisoning, if I ask how old and if they say a teenager, I just know right away it was a pill. So really, the root of this, just to go back and kind of put it in context, goes back to the prescription drug opiate crisis that we had in this country. You know, I tell people 2012, there were 255 million opiate prescriptions written in the United States, a huge number, right? And, uh, some of them written without really medical necessity, a very small fractional percentage of doctors, of pharmacists who are unethical, just like we have in our own profession. And we know that this very
Sure.
infinitesimally small percentage of bad people can still cause tremendous harm to the community, just like in our profession. So, hey, we realized what was going on. We dialed back the prescriptions through education of doctors, pharmacies, law enforcement efforts. And that number now is down to maybe 140 million, which is probably more where it should be. But what happened? It created awareness about these prescription drug pills. It created a demand for these prescription drug pills. So when the supply was properly tightened up and diversion into the black market was stopped, the light bulb went off for these drug cartels, and they said, "Hey, we can step in here now and capitalize on this." So we started seeing probably about 2016, right around that time frame, we started seeing that the Mexican drug cartels really get involved in fentanyl production, and especially the creation of these counterfeit prescription pills. And what they did is they took a pill made by Malencroft, I think is the company, a 30 milligram oxycodone pill. I think it's called Roxycodone, is kind of the brand name or something. And they just started making them, at that time by the thousands and shipping them up here to the United States. So what happens up here? People are accustomed to the black market for legitimate oxycodone pills, oxycontin pills, whatever. So they're on the street, they're buying these pills, and it's not the ingredients that they think it is, right? There's no pharmaceutical ingredients in these pills now, whether it's fake oxycodone, fake Percocet, fake Xanax. I've seen it with all of them. No pharmaceutical ingredients, just fentanyl. It kind of generally mimics the effects of the legitimate prescription drug, but it's infinitely more dangerous. And it's that deception of, people thinking they're taking something else, especially teenagers, that's causing a lot of the harm in the community. And also, Mark, the other part of it is, you know, it's just that it's because of the virtual world we live in now, or the digital world, it's just so much more available. Like you can go on social media, connect with someone selling these pills if you're a teenager, have them actually delivered to your house or down the street, and pay for them with a payment app. So it's not like now it's just there's quote certain bad neighborhoods where drugs are sold. Everywhere now, like the parents have to have the mindset that like everywhere is uh is an open air drug market almost, because these drugs are so readily available. And we're talking about a drug, this is the scary part, 50 times more powerful than heroin, and it's now infinitely more available than heroin ever was just 10 years ago.
See, Bill, this is, I mean, look, I'm a parent. I have a, soon to be 9-year-old son, but it doesn't matter if you have a 29-year-old or a 19 or a 9-year-old. These things are topics where, parents lose
Hmm.
sleep, have nightmares about things happening to their kids. And I'm one of them. I'm human. I hear stuff like this. A couple of things. So the counterfeit is, it's fascinating in a horrible way to me. But the other thing you touched on a few weeks ago when you spoke about this was the word talking
Hmm.
about the word
Hmm.
laced with, or the phrase laced with, and so, and you made it clear it's like
Right.
nothing's laced here, in other words, and I'll let you expand on that. The other thing is going back to the, like you said, the open air market, the availability, how ubiquitous uh, these pills are over the internet. I'm astounded, again, it's just my ignorance, but I'm astounded that it's so easy for the traffickers, for these criminals to actually move this stuff across the internet. And we'll come back to
Hmm.
the laced word in a minute. But what involvement does the DEA have, or other federal agencies or local agencies, about trying to monitor, trying to crack down on the actual selling of the stuff
Yeah. So
online?
and here's why that selling online can be very easy. And this is what, because a lot of times we'll say, hey, are social media companies doing enough to protect our children from these people preying upon them? But I'm going to ask you to even take it one step further and say, like, we all know, hey, if I'm a football fan and I look at certain football videos on Instagram, let's say, what are they going to send to me? What are they going to direct to me for the next week? What's that algorithm going to say? This guy wants to look at these videos. We're going to send him these videos. So the danger that we have is the possibility that a teenager curious about drugs, not uncommon, they search for a hashtag or for one specific thing, and they see it and they say, okay, you know, delete it. Now, what happens if for the next 5 days, 10 days, they're bombarded with more traffic with that same hashtag or that same, it's possible that these algorithms are actually connecting teenagers with drug dealers. Like that's really the
Mhm.
reality of what could be happening.
Yeah.
So what do? We speak with social media companies. When we see a problem, we alert them of it. We try to educate them, because the expectation, just like the expectation isn't that all parents understand what's going on, the expectation at least a year ago or a year and a half ago should not have been, hey, these social media companies know this is going on and they're not stopping it. But we're getting to the point that that probably should be the expectation. We've educated them on the type of language that's used, the type of hashtags, emojis, code words, etc. And at some point, and I don't know, when that'll be, but there comes the accountability piece, which is like, hey, these things are happening on your platform. You're responsible for them,
Right. Yeah. Now I can only imagine, what the challenge is, because the floodgates are wide open. And look, we know in law enforcement that a lot of these crooks are. I mean, they're as clever as any individual comes. And when you have these syndicates, when you have organizations that are all working together, like some bad cartoon for
Yep.
evil, it's very, very, very difficult to stop them. It's not impossible. My God, the challenges are enormous. And when I said, what is the role of the DEA or other federal agencies, it was certainly just an inquiry. It's like, I'm kind of curious, how do you wrap your hands around this? And it's a very difficult thing to do. Now, going back a minute ago when I asked you about the
Yep.
lacing, that's a,
Yeah,
that's a misnomer, by the way. It was, for me, it's like it opened
it
my
is.
eyes when you explained this. So have at it.
Yeah. And it's almost like it's kind of a pet peeve of mine because a lot of times people will say, "Hey, prescription drugs laced with fentanyl," and that makes it sound like someone took a legitimate prescription drug, added a little bit of fentanyl to it, and was selling it. And that's just not true. That's not what's happening. The pills now and I'm going to tell you 100% of the pills, all of them that are sold on the street now, that are sold on social media, they're all fake, they're all counterfeit, and they contain fentanyl. There's no other active pharmaceutical ingredients in them. So they're not laced with anything. It's just a fentanyl pill with some additives and fillers and binders to keep it together. Now, when I tell people, hey, 100% of the pills are fake, that's a bold statement. How can you say 100%? Mark, all I can say is we're in the pill business. I mean, we actually have, getting back to your previous question, how do we, handle things on social media? We have a team of agents that works social media cases, and they try to get these dealers out from behind the computer screen, meet them on the street, make buys. We're making buys, on traditional street corner type things, mid-level and wholesale deals where we're buying 10,000, 100,000 pills at a time. And we're seizing huge quantities of these pills, as many as a million at a time sometimes. We test them at our laboratory and we do not see any legitimate pharmaceutical ingredients in these pills right now. And that's one thing I have to stress to people is like, if you're buying a pill on the street or on social media or getting it anywhere other than a pharmacist or directly from a doctor, right now, your assumption has to be, not should be,
Well, that's
has
what
to
it
be
sounds like. I
that it's
mean,
fake if you want to protect yourself.
it sounds just like what you're saying here. I know we talked earlier about, you mentioned about, it's not just a quote unquote bad neighborhood, or maybe something that's more uh, something we actually associate with drug users. But are you still seeing? Are the victims, are they predominantly someone who's already addicted to drugs, who has a drug history, or is there a predominance of like experimental entry level?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer is no. When we see a drug caused death today, it's not the stereotypical drug caused death of 10 years ago, right? It used to be, um, let me put it this way. We've always had an issue with our community in helping people suffering from substance use disorder. And those people used to be the ones that were most at risk for a drug caused death. Why? Because they were using the drug every day. They were sometimes going into treatment. They would come out of treatment. And once they were out of treatment and they had detoxed, uh, their level of tolerance to a drug was greatly diminished, and they would go back to taking a dose that they previously took. It's too much for them. They're poisoned and they die. Today, what we're seeing is something completely different, where we still have harm to the community with substance use disorder. And I don't want to, make it sound like that's not happening. Yes, people suffering from substance use disorder are dying from fentanyl. But what's also happening now is a group of drug users, I'll call them experimental drug users. These are people in their teenagers that maybe never took
Mhm.
drugs before or have some very limited experience with drugs. They feel safe experimenting with pills because they think it's a prescription drug, and they feel like, based on societal norms right now, they feel like prescription drugs are safe, so they don't think it'll really have any adverse consequences. They're experimenting with these drugs, not knowing it's fentanyl, and fentanyl is killing them. Then there's the group of, let's call them recreational drug users. And how I would describe these people, or maybe how they would describe themselves, is something like, hey, I don't have a drug problem. Maybe, one night a month, two nights a month, I like to party with cocaine and my friends, and we go out to a club.
Mhm.
That's where we're seeing cocaine laced with fentanyl, or cocaine or fentanyl mistaken for cocaine, cause these kind of what we'll call like mass overdose events, or multi overdose events, where there's like three or four people in a house or three or four people at a location. They'll all use this drug and all get poisoned by it. So that there's harm in those two areas that we really didn't see to the magnitude we're seeing it today ever before.
Um, it's fascinating on so many levels. So in other words, the the rapid evolution of this. I mean, it has been rapid, and of course, you lay the foundation as to really why, what the genesis of this was. It's kind of a self inflicted wound with the number of prescriptions
Yeah.
that were offered up over the last 10, 15 years and kind of laid the foundation for it. You did touch on something there about we talked about laced as opposed to pure, or not
Hmm.
pure, but
Hmm.
only fentanyl and these counterfeit pills, and no other medicinal or narcotic ingredients. But you did just talk about cocaine laced, or
Yep.
fentanyl laced. I'm
Yep.
sorry. Can you explain to
Yeah.
me and to other people what is, in other words, you have fentanyl, which is
Yep.
deadly, and it can cause the high, have the effect that a drug user or an experimental person might want to experience. What is the purpose for a drug cartel, a mid level, a low level drug uh, pusher to actually lace cocaine with fentanyl? What is is there a selling point?
Yeah.
Do they actually make it known it's like that, or is this by chance, or what?
So two things are happening, and that's a great question because I think intuitively, you're taking a drug that's an opiate, let's call that a depressant, and you're mixing it with cocaine, a stimulant, and you would think, why, that doesn't make sense. Why would someone mix? Why would someone purposefully mix those two drugs? They do mix those two
Hmm.
drugs. It's called a speedball, and it's actually John Belushi is the guy in our generation who died in Hollywood of a speedball. At that
Okay.
time, it was cocaine and heroin. But here's what the premise of
Hmm.
that mixture is. The premise is that the perceived negative effects of the opiate will be counteracted by the positive effects of the stimulant, and the perceived negative effects of the stimulant will be counteracted by the perceived positive effects of the opiate. So it's almost like they feel that putting these two drugs together is going to create a pure euphoric high. That's why it would be mixed on purpose and incredibly dangerous for a couple of reasons. Number one, just the strength of fentanyl, 2 milligrams is enough to potentially kill you. And number two, who's mixing the cocktail? There's no room for error when you're using synthetic drugs. There's just not. So we are seeing definitely cases of deaths and overdoses where that cocktail was used, and it just you know led to bad experiences. The other thing that's happening, which is equally, people are like, no, that can't happen. You can't be serious. Hey, what I tell people is there's no barcodes on these packages and there's no warning labels on these packages. This isn't like Amazon where you order something and you can track it and you know what you're hopefully getting, etc. What happens frequently is somewhere in the supply chain, these drugs are coming across the border. Now, to your question about who would mix them, it's generally, you kind of touched on it at the end, at the lower retail level. It's usually the retail level distributor that'll create the drug cocktail. And he's doing that kind of for brand identification where he's going to sell it to someone and they're going to say, that's an incredible high. I'm going to go back to this dealer. So that's not necessarily something that's being done by the cartels mixing cocaine and fentanyl. But when they ship it across the border, and I'm sure you can relate to this from your days on the roads. There'll be kilograms of fentanyl in a car and kilograms of cocaine in a car. Now, the packaging looks exactly the same, and sure, if you had pure fentanyl powder and pure cocaine, you could tell the difference with the naked eye. But don't forget, neither drug is pure. It's cut with things, mannitol, lactose, whatever it is. And those cuts make up a majority of the product. So when you look at it, most of what you're actually seeing is the cut. So it's going to look identical. So if someone in that supply chain makes a mistake and passes a kilo of fentanyl to someone when he was told to give them a kilogram of cocaine, they're going to break it down, put it, into distribution as if it's cocaine, and it's going to go out in the street and it's going to harm a lot of people. And that scenario happens all the time as well. So it's incompetent drug dealers on one side with just mistaken product identity, and then the other side is people trying to create this perfect euphoric high, mixing drugs that are extremely dangerous to play with.
It just sounds like an evil crapshoot here. I mean, it just sounds, things are so wide open. Um, how many agents do you have in your field division? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah. So we have right now about 225, and That covers the state of Nevada, the state of Hawaii, Guam and Saipan, and the 7 counties that make up the greater LA area. So you can see where the whole task force program thing, where we'll deputize state and local county officers, that's huge for us, and that's really the only thing that enables us to impact the problem successfully.
Well, the reason I asked that, I had an idea. I actually thought it was a little more than that, but even thinking it was a little more, I want the listeners and viewers to understand what challenge you, as a drug enforcement administration leader, are facing. And I mean, the complexities, the enormity of this. What percentage? Uh, what percentage of caseloads are dominated by the fentanyl problem right now? Is it almost exclusive? Is it
Yeah,
80%? Is it 50%?
yeah. It's almost exclusive, and here's the thing, Mark, which has, when dealing with Mexican drug cartels, this has kind of, because of the way they operate because of the way they operate, it's kind of helped us actually, and that is that they all traffic several different drugs, right? They're not, there's no organization that just does fentanyl and another one that just does methamphetamine. They're all doing all the drugs. So even when we're, 3 years ago investigating an organization for methamphetamine, we're seizing fentanyl as part of that
Hmm.
investigation too, and charging them with that. And the same thing now, we'll be investigating a fentanyl case, and we're going to seize methamphetamine because they're moving that as well. So all these organizations, it's the same organizations, and they're polydrug, meaning they're moving whatever drug they can get their hands on to make a profit, preferring the synthetic drugs because they're so profitable. Hey, these pills they're making for about 13 cents in Mexico. They're selling them up here wholesale. And when I say wholesale, that's, let's say buying several thousand pills, anywhere from like 45, 50 cents to a couple bucks. And then the retail, maybe $6, 10, $15, depending on where you are, uh,
Hmm.
where you're purchasing the pill, what your relationship is, how many you're buying, et cetera. So you can see it's incredibly profitable.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Going back to the late '80s, early '90s with
Hmm.
crack cocaine uh, and powder cocaine and heroin, but really crack. There were a lot of tactics and strategies, partnerships, campaigns that help to bring that, I won't say to an end, but to seriously curtail that. Look, we live in a different world. I got out a couple of years ago, but we certainly live in a different world now politically. There's just no way around it. We're not going to get into
Hmm.
politics. I know
Hmm.
you're still on the job, but it is reality. I think we all realize that, people our age, how things have changed over the last three
Yeah.
decades. Do you What do you see? Not the end game, because that's just too final, but in the not too distant future, do you see uh, enough support from the federal agencies, from the federal government in general, from local law enforcement, from politicians, from community groups? Do you see the same help that we got 30 years ago, um, today? And what do you see the path forward being?
I so here's what I think. I don't think I think that we probably need in the law enforcement side a lot of, let me put it this way, a lot of that is going to be on us in the law enforcement side to do a better job of articulating our value and what we do. Like if and I was very, one of the things when I took over the office here in LA that I didn't agree with was the way we would discuss our work, and we would make our work about the drug trafficker. Hey, we caught this drug trafficker today. We seized this much drugs today. That's not necessarily that doesn't necessarily resonate with the community. When we tell the story of what we do, uh, or when we describe our mission, let me give you an example, and I'll use a CHP, right? Simple example. There's people in the community that think, hey, the mission of the CHP is to write speeding tickets. And if you put it like that, the public is not going to see value in that, Mark. But when CHP flips it and says, the mission of the CHP is actually to keep your children safe on the freeway. And in order to do that, we're going to have to write some speeding tickets. We're going to go after the people that are causing the biggest safety risk and the most egregious violators, and we're going to have to do that to keep our families safe. That's a change where the public actually sees value in that. So I think us in law enforcement, we have to take responsibility for telling our story differently. And I've found that when we do that, the public is more engaged with us. They are more behind us, and it's kind of giving us more momentum to address the problem. And here's a real question that I ask, and I talk about this case. And I know when I talk about it, people think, oh, you're just talking about that one case. It's an outlier. No, the reality is I'm choosing this case because it's been fully adjudicated and I could talk about it. It's not going to taint a jury by me bringing it up. But there was a case in Pasadena, California, September 2020. One drug dealer caused 7 overdoses and 3 deaths in one weekend. In one weekend. And in California, like, I'm cognizant of the fact that we don't necessarily, and when I say we, I just mean the community at large, right? They feel like drug trafficking is a victimless crime. They feel like we shouldn't be incarcerating drug dealers. But here's my very real question to them, which hopefully the light bulb goes off. If law enforcement doesn't intervene, what happens the next weekend? When that person just caused 7 overdoses and 3 deaths last weekend, what is your expectation of next weekend if that person's still on the street? And 100% of the time, people will say, "Yeah, I guess we have to do something about that." So that's the side of the story that we need to tell, is the story of the victims. Who are the victims of drug trafficking? What about the babies born addicted to opiates? What about the teenagers dying of fentanyl? That's the value of DEA, is reducing that harm in the community. And hey, I don't have no problem people using the term harm reduction. My goal is reduce harm every day. We're going to do it sometimes by arresting people. We're going to do it sometimes by going to high schools and talking about kids. And we're going to do it sometimes through PSA announcements about what fentanyl is and where it is in the drug supply, so people can make better decisions. But the reality is, I do see some momentum now. Some things I'm a little frustrated with, uh, but I think it's on us to really articulate the importance of what we're doing right now more than ever.
Well, Bill, you said it beautifully. And by the way, the public information manager for the California Highway Patrol just retired. They could use someone like you up there with the CHP. You put that very well, and the analogy you use with the tickets and protecting your family. It's a great analogy. And that message does need to get out there. Again, as a parent, it goes right to my heart when I hear this stuff about other parents who've lost children, and that message that you actually delivered needs to be put out there as much as possible. It's fantastic. And now, the message is always important. I'm a big believer in it. I was a PIO for years for the CHP, and the right message delivered the right way goes a long way to help law enforcement get the job done that they need to do. But of course, we also realize that there's the hammer side of it as well, the enforcement
Hmm.
side.
Hmm.
Is there any plan, any effort, again, without giving away anything that's
Yeah,
confidential, but generally speaking, what about hitting the manufacturers where they live, quite literally? Is there
right.
anything going on like that?
We have agents assigned working in Mexico. Um, it's a challenging environment to work in down there. I think everyone in the U.S. government has been on the record asking them to do more about addressing the labs down there, and trying to stop the precursor chemicals from getting into the country to make these drugs. But the way I look at that, Mark, is that is a political issue at this point. And that's the reality. It's not a law enforcement
Yeah.
issue, it's a political issue.
Hmm.
And I have no control over that. I'm
Hmm.
here in Los Angeles dealing with what of the results of that, maybe, right? But I think that's going to be something that it's just, politically, sooner or later, some decisions have to be made about that.
Okay, gotcha. We're back. But Bill, it's like I said, it's been enlightening for me. I know it's been enlightening for the listeners and viewers. It was an honor to work with the DEA all the years that I did, again, in an ancillary role. I want to thank you for your time. Um, I'm looking forward to talking with you again. I'm sure we'll be having some rubber chicken meetings over the weeks and months
Absolutely.
and
Right.
years to come. And thank you for your service. It's Bill Bodner, Drug Enforcement Administration Special Agent in Charge. Sir, thank you for my friend. Stay safe, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for what you do too, of supporting people still working out there. It's appreciated.
Absolutely. Bill, don't you go away because I want you to hear like everybody else. Folks, check us out, yourleonation.org. Follow us on Instagram. Check us out on YouTube. Click the like button, subscribe button. It really, really helps. And don't forget about our nonprofit partner, Your Leo Project. It's the Leo Project. Find it on Your Leo Project. We escaped $5,000 today to the families of the fallen officers from the El Monte Police Department. It's because of supporters like you that the Leo Project was able to do that. So please support us so we can support those who protect you and all of our families. God bless you. We'll talk to you next time.